to talk today about the objection. We just want to rent the home if we don't sell it, or we're going to rent the home if we don't get our price. The first thing I want to mention as it relates to all of these objections, let alone the ones that, we're going to talk about today, the renting the property, today and waiting until spring a little bit later this afternoon, is this. If it comes up in the beginning of the conversation, in most cases, you're simply going to ignore the objection. Okay, let me say that again. If it comes up in the beginning of the conversation, we're simply going to ignore the objection. If I'm calling for sale by owners, or I'm talking with expired listings and I'm asking, about, what their plan is, or if they're aware of the fact their home has come up on the market as an expired listing, a lot of times they'll say, well, that's fine. We know that, but we're going to rent the home right now. Or, well, we couldn't get our price, so we're going to take it off the market. We'll just rent the house for a while, for a couple of years. If it gets brought up in the beginning of the call, the first thing I want you to understand is ignore it and move on. Oh, so you're thinking of renting the home. Well, listen, I appreciate that. Let me ask you this. If you had sold the home when it was available originally, where would you have gone next? What were you going to buy? Were you staying locally or were you leaving the area? We're thinking we're going to take it off the market for a while. Oh, good. So you're thinking of taking it off the market. Well, I appreciate your honesty. Hey, let me ask you this. If you had sold the home when it was available, where do you think you'd have gone next? Well, we're going to relist with our current agent. Oh, so you're going to put it back on the market with the agent that's handled the sale? All right, I appreciate that. Appreciate your honesty. Hey, if you had sold the home when it was listed, where were you planning to go next? Were you staying local or were you leaving the area? So, first point is, although I'm going to show you how to handle some of these objections over the next 6 sessions, I want you to realize just because you know the answer doesn't mean you always want to handle the objection. What I'm going to do is ignore it up front, and if they bring back the rental objection after I found out about their motivation, after I found out about their time frame, after we've talked about the market and given them an understanding of what's going on in the market, then at that point it'll be relevant to deal with the objection. So in this particular case, let's assume you get later on in the script and, they're having a hard time figuring out what they're going to do, but, they think if they don't get their price, they'll simply rent the home. So let's look at the message. What is the message to a renter? I at Toronto last week when I was doing the Legacy Sales Retreat, I asked the group, I said, who in the room is a landlord? Raise your hands. And, quite a few real estate agents work with investment property and are landlords, and they raised their hands. And I said to the group, the group with your hands up, simple question, is being a landlord as easy as people think? And there was a unanimous no. And I said to the group, I said, well, what kinds of things do you have to deal with that, being a landlord isn't necessarily the easiest thing in the world? I mean, what kinds of challenges do you have? And I heard everything from finding qualified renters right now is a challenge because, there's so much rental inventory, in which in a lot of markets, there's a ton of rental inventory, and that's continuing to grow because people decide, well, if I can't sell, I'll rent. I heard some horror stories about collecting the rent. Actually getting renters is one thing, and then collecting is another issue altogether, and the time it takes to be a collections person. Collecting is one thing, collecting on time so your cash flow isn't impacted and your credit isn't impacted is another issue. I heard stories about problems. Problems in repairs. I mean, I think I've heard more war stories about, middle of the night, boilers that go out, repairs that need to be made, the hot water heater goes. I mean, do you want to talk about eating up your profits, let alone your time? We've got, anything that goes wrong with the property, under the rental agreement, these things need to get fixed. I mean, if you're living there yourself, you can live with it for a while, but, leak in a roof when a tenant is there, you're contractually obligated, to fix the problem. And then, of course, I heard the stories about the destruction of the property, the wrong tenants, the extended families that are living there, and before you know it, they've destroyed the property, destroyed the landscaping, destroyed the lawn, destroyed the walls. And then, of course, I heard lots of legal issues and legal war stories as it relates to, either compliance issues or, collections or eviction processes that we need to go through. I mean, just try to evict a tenant. I mean, how many months behind can you get just, before you can get somebody out of there? And so I said to the group, so, renting, being a landlord, it's not necessarily an easy thing to do, and then I thought, well, how many of your sellers are actually equipped to do that? How many normal everyday people who aren't professional, investors, who aren't landlords by trade, what are they getting themselves into? And then I said to the group, and how long are they getting themselves into this? Because if somebody is thinking of renting the property, I mean, are they thinking of renting the property for 6 months? Is the market going to be any better in 6 months? Are we going to see appreciating prices in a year or two or three? I said in most cases, with the supply of inventory we have in the market as it stands, we're probably at least 24 months to, the bottom, another 12 months to selling off the excess inventory. I mean, we're talking, about renting being a 3 to 5 year decision. If they're renting until such time they can get their money out of the property again. And very few very few sellers think about the fact that this is more of a long-term decision, not a short-term, a year from now the market will be wonderful again. Especially like I said, in markets where you've got a 2 year supply of inventory as it is. Meaning if the bottom of the market were today, it would take 2 years just to sell off the excess inventory we have. And remember, even when the market hits the bottom and starts to come back up, well, prices don't appreciate until inventory has sold off to a level where there's less than a 5 month supply of homes. So we could be at the bottom. Things could start getting better now. But we're still going to see prices fade as long as there's too many, homes for sale and not enough buyers for those homes. So appreciation in a market sets in at about a 4 or 5 month supply of inventory or less. And if you're not sure where the prices go and what prices do based on the supply of inventory, you need to send me an email at coachbobfitzgerald@gmail.com and ask me for the market report. And I'll go ahead and send you the market report for sellers, which actually describes what's happening to prices based on the supply of homes, and you can help them see that, we're looking at some time here. So now we know the message. So every script, every dialogue is simply a communication of that message. Now, because this is the first objection we're going to look at in this series of 6, you'll notice a pattern with all 6. And the pattern is real simple. I'm going to align with them always first. So I'm going to repeat and validate what they say. I'm going to try to get in alignment with them so that it doesn't feel like it's me against them. It's we're on the same team. And then normally I'm going to try to ask a question. Once I've aligned with them, if I can ask a question, I can get them thinking, I can get them talking. Asking a question is a part of selling. Selling isn't telling, it's asking questions. So I'm going to ask a few questions. And then thirdly, I'm going to deliver a message. I am going to give them information. And I'm going to try to be persuasive rather than informative. And then fourthly, I'm going to close. And closing is simply bringing them back to where they should be to begin with. So I'm going to align with them. I'm going to ask a question. I'm going to deliver a message. And then I'm going to close. And you'll see that pattern as we go through. So, we'll rent the home, Bob, if we don't get, our price. So first align with them. Well, listen, Mr. Seller, so renting the home is an option. Okay, well, I appreciate that. A lot of sellers have the same idea you do. So I'll validate that. Oh, so you're thinking of renting the home as an option. All right, I understand. A lot of sellers have decided to go in that direction. So now we're on the same team. Okay, now let me ask a question. Have you ever rented a home before? Do you have much experience being a landlord? And I'm always going to downswing the word landlord too. It's like, the scary word landlord. Well, I appreciate that. A lot of sellers have the same idea. Hey, John, have you ever rented a home before? Do you have much experience being a landlord? And usually you shut up because you've asked a question. They'll start fumbling a little bit. And if they have had much experience, well, then they'll understand what they're about to get themselves into. And if they haven't had much experience, they really need to think about what they're going to get themselves into. And keep this in mind. In some cases, it might be the best option for them, and that's okay too. I'm not attached to the outcome. In most cases, it's not the best decision for a homeowner to rent the home for 3 to 5 years. In some cases, it might be their best decision, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm going to ask them if they've had much experience, being a landlord. And if they have, then I might say, well, as you know, there's some challenges with renting a home. And if they haven't, I'm going to ask another question. Have you considered some of the challenges that you'd faced, being a landlord? So let me go back and string it together again. Okay, so renting the home is an option. Oh, I appreciate that. A lot of sellers have decided to go in that direction. John, have you ever rented a home before? Do you have much experience being a landlord? Well, no, not really. I mean, but so it can't be too hard. Well, it's not necessarily difficult, but have you ever considered some of the challenges, involved in being a landlord or renting a home? And now I'm going to start to go through a quick list of some of the challenges. Well, first of all, John, there's finding qualified renters. There's a lot of rental property right now. A lot of people have the same idea you do. There's a lot of vacancy. Finding a qualified renter is not always an easy thing to do. And then secondly, there's collecting the rents. Being able to actually find people that pay for the duration of the lease. All they have to do is not pay 2 or 3 months of the lease, and there goes the cash flow. A lot of times people don't realize that collecting on time is a lot of times an issue. You're trying to use the rental income to offset your mortgage income. You're probably at a deficit to begin with, so you're losing a little bit of money every month, and now you end up getting rent late, and before you know it, the mortgage payment is late, and your credit's being destroyed, even if you do have a tenant that simply isn't paying on time. A lot of times, landlords, talk about all the problems and the repairs, and at this point in the script, it says, tell a real story. You really want to be able to have one rental war story, just one, about the roof that needed to be repaired, or the hot water heater and the busting in the middle of the night, or the furnace going, in the middle of winter, and having to drop 6,000-7,000 just to get, heat restored in less than, 48 hours. And some of the challenges there. If you don't have a rental war story, you need to go to your office's rental department, or you need to find and have lunch with somebody that that has rental income. You need to get at least one war story about some problems or some repairs, that needed to be made. And then on the script, you'll see D, then it comes, obviously, destruction of the property is always an issue. So let me bring this together. So John, have you considered some of the challenges you deal with if you decided to rent the home? Well, obviously there's some challenges. Well, first of all, finding qualified renters isn't always easy. There's a lot of vacancies right now. A lot of sellers have the same idea you do. There's really never been more rental property available. If you talk to landlords, they'll tell you collecting the rent isn't always a systematic process. Getting paid and getting paid on time sometimes can be an issue. In this particular case, I imagine the rental income will offset your mortgage, right? So if we, even collect the rent, but we don't collect it on time and there's delays and weeks and months behind, obviously that can be a problem. And the biggest challenge you're going to deal with as you talk to landlords is just the fact that they have to deal with problems and repairs, and they're almost always unexpected. I just had lunch with a landlord friend of mine, and he was telling me about a furnace that he needed to replace a few months ago. And I don't know if you've really thought too much about that. One of the challenges a couple of years from now is, you call me to list the home again, and then we find out the tenants have destroyed the property, the landscaping's been destroyed, the lawn hasn't been kept up, there's holes in the wall, there's a lot of wear and tear, and then so we've gotten through the third step. So the first thing we're going to do is validate and appreciate. The second thing we're going to do is see if they've asked a question, see if they've had much experience being a landlord. Third thing we're going to do is give them some information about, what that might look like. The fourth thing we're going to do is give them some information about the time frame that we're dealing with in terms of these problems. So I wrote down, are you clear that you need to rent the home for at least 2 or 3 years? So now we've gone through some of the challenges. John, are you clear that if you decided to rent the home that we're looking at least a 2, if not a 3, even a 4-year decision here? Well, what do you mean? Well, right now here in Richmond, we've got a 12-month supply of inventory. And that means if not a single home were listed in the next 12 months, we have enough inventory to last until literally January of 2010. So we're literally 12 to 18 months minimum away from being at the bottom of the market. Another 12 to 18 months to sell off the excess inventory before we even begin to see prices go up again. Now we close. Number 5. John, don't you think it might be better for you and your family just to accept reality now, move on with your life? Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we get together and talk about your options, and then I close for an appointment. So what we're going to do is we're going to validate, we're going to ask a couple of questions, and we're going to make a couple of statements about the fact that renting brings its challenges and that we're looking at a 2 to 3, 4-year process of dealing with those challenges at a minimum. And really, at the end of the day, isn't it better for them and their family just to move on with their life, to cut their losses and move on with their life, and then close for an appointment? I'm not trying to get a listing, I'm just going back to an appointment. So let me put this all together once. You can listen to it as we, listen to the audio time and time again. So, well, Bob, if we don't sell it, we're just going to rent the home. And, that's why we don't want to set an appointment. We're just thinking, we're going to take it off the market, rent it for a while. Well, okay. Well, listen, I appreciate that. So renting the home is definitely an option. I do understand a lot of sellers have decided to go in that direction. John, have you ever rented a home before? Do you have much experience being a landlord? Well, we've rented a home in the past. Obviously, we have a lot of experience, but it's not that complicated. Well, no, it's not complicated, but obviously, then you've considered some of the challenges in renting a home. Well, like what? Well, first of all, finding qualified renters isn't always as easy as people think. There's a lot of people that are renting the home right now. There's never really been more rental property available, so the vacancy rate is as high as it's ever been. Collecting the rents, well, that's easier said than done. When we do find qualified tenants, collecting the rents on time so that it matches up with your mortgage payment and your cash flow, that can potentially be a problem. If you talk to real landlords, they'll tell you the biggest challenge is dealing with, unexpected problems and repairs. Just the other day, I had lunch with a friend of mine who has a lot of rental property, and they were talking about having to replace a furnace within 48 hours. A $7,000 hit that they weren't expecting. And then as a real estate agent, I can't tell you how difficult it is for me to sell a home that had been rented for a few years because of the destruction of the property, the destruction of the landscaping, the lawn, the home itself. Let me ask you this. Are you clear that if you'd rent the home, that we'd need to deal with some of these issues for probably the next 2 or 3 years at a minimum? Well, we were thinking, we'd rent it. We didn't think it'd be 2 or 3 years. Well, right now here in Richmond, we have a 12-month supply of inventory. What that means, if not a single home were listed in the next 12 months, it would take literally until January of 2010 just to sell the homes that are already on the market. So we're at least 12 to 18 months away from the bottom of the market. And then we'll need another 12 to 18 months minimum to sell off the excess inventory before we can even begin to see prices go up again. So, don't you think it might be better for you and your family just to accept reality now, and do what it takes to sell the home and move on with your life? Why don't we do this? Why don't we get together either Thursday or Friday? We'll talk about your options. I'll tell you exactly what's happening in the market and exactly what it would take to get your home sold and move on with your life. Then you guys can decide whether renting is the right option or not. And I go back to closing for an appointment. So listen, the answers to objections are always solutions to their problems. The answers to their objections are always thoughts that they hadn't really considered that cause them to realize doing it your way is better for them. So I want to leave you with these last three thoughts. Okay, number one, don't be attached to the outcome. Okay, if you're going to be strong, you've got to not be attached to the outcome. Number two, it's all about them. It has nothing to do with you. You don't need another listing and you don't need another sale. It's about them and whether or not they should really be caught up being a landlord for the next 3 to 5 years. And the answer in most of those cases is going to be that is not good for them. So it's got to be all about them. And because it's all about them, we have to have a don't take no for an answer attitude. It's not that we're not taking no for an answer. It's that we have an attitude that I'm not going to take no for an answer because ultimately what I'm trying to do is get people to see what's best for them. So I'm not going to roll over and just die because they tell me, well, we're going to rent the house. And I'm not going to pretend it's easy because I don't want to be in a confrontational environment. I want to paint a picture of what life could look like if they make a 3 to 5 year decision to rent the home and really ask them if that's in their best interest right now. And you know what? For the ones that it is, well, I'm not attached to the outcome and it's all about them. And so maybe they should rent the property. But for the others and the majority, it's not the wisest decision that you can make. So that's the rental objection. If you don't have the script, go ahead and email me at coachbobfitzgerald@gmail.com. If you're listening to this via audio, that's fine. Just go ahead and email me at coachbobfitzgerald@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to send you the objection handler for We Want to Rent the Home. Well, thanks for being here. We'll cover, we want to wait until spring this afternoon. We're going to cover, do you have a buyer for my home tomorrow morning? So we're going to have a fun week with objection handling. Make it a productive one. We'll see you later today, or we'll see you tomorrow. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.